I'm Lieutenant Colonel retired Dr. Ian McVicker, and I brought in some pieces of a T-55 tank that I got in the Russian Federation, as well as a copy of the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty. I served in the Canadian Armed Forces for 42 years, and I served in J3 Arms Control Verification from 1993 to 1998.
In the aftermath of the Second World War, a new kind of war was born, the so-called Cold War. The term applied to more than 40 years of geopolitical tensions between the Western world, led by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc nations, led by the Soviet Union. The Cold War saw the rise of NATO and the now defunct Warsaw Pact. Though not an armed conflict in its own right, the Cold War fueled proxy wars that were sponsored and sometimes fought by the East and West, including the Korean War and Vietnam. It led to nuclear proliferation, construction of the Berlin Wall, and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Historians mark the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 as the end of the Cold War, though some might argue little has changed in the 30 years since.
So welcome to Militaria, Ian, and I was wondering if you could take a few moments and explain what we see in front of us and how you managed to acquire them.
Sure. I brought in pieces of a T-55 tank, as well as a Russian winter hat, a copy of the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty, as well as a machine gun box with plastic links from a T-55 tank. This particular item is the commander's vision block of a T-55 tank. The way it would work is that this would be in the tank, and the commander will be in the turret like this, and then turning to look for targets.
And how did you acquire all these items?
This particular one I got at the St. Petersburg reduction site. Petersburg was really interesting because there were tanks as far as the eye could see. I took a photo at one point, and everywhere you looked, there were tanks. It was really just like a big junkyard.
And this was all because you were a member of an arms verification team?
That's right. It was a small organization. There were about 20 of us full-time. We looked after any treaty that Canada had signed up for as a state party.
That was the result of basically the end of the Cold War. I was wondering if you just wanted to elaborate the difference.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Well, at the end of the Second World War, relations were very tense between the World War II allies and with the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. And this was codified in 1948 when the Soviet Union organized a grouping of all the various Eastern European states that fell under its influence. And where all this comes together, for me, is that I was an arms control verification on-site inspector, and I was working under the Conventional Armed Forces in Europe Treaty. It's more or less the document that actually practically on the ground codified the end of the Cold War. Because it's one thing to say we were going to reduce tensions, but the way to reduce tensions was actually to reduce armaments. There were two types of inspections. There were the reduction site inspections, where we would receive a declaration of the number of vehicles that the Soviet Union or any other former Warsaw Pact country would be reducing. And they would send us a list of the vehicles that they said, right down to the serial number, they had actually destroyed. And our role was to take the lists that they provided to NATO and literally match every vehicle and every part of every vehicle. The second type of inspection was the declared site inspection, in which Canada or any other NATO nation would declare to a host nation with 72 hours warning that we wanted to go into their nation and do an inspection of a declared site.
When you went in for the reductions inspections, were there quotas set by a higher headquarters, like NATO headquarters, or was this, we're going to go and we're going to record what's being done?
Every nation had to submit an annual data exchange and their annual goals on what they were expecting to reduce. And there was a 3-year period in which all these reductions were supposed to occur.
Did you ever get the impression that they were showing you the stuff that was going to be scrapped anyways and they really weren't reducing anything?
We did actually get to inspect units, and most of the tanks that they were reducing were, of course, the earlier ones, and that was not common in the Russian Federation. I spent 5 years going back and forth between Eastern Europe and Canada, and I did 8 missions in Russia, 8 missions in Ukraine, and pretty much 1 or 2 missions in every other country of the former Warsaw Pact. I was also doing on-site arms control inspection just at the end of the civil war in Bosnia. I was only there for about 10 days, but I almost lost my life 3 times. On one particular inspection, I noticed that one of the nations had actually committed a treaty violation. There was an item of equipment which they were not supposed to have. We had to get evidence of this, and we knew that the escort team leader had a background in counterintelligence, and we figured that he was there to stop us. This man was not stupid. He knew what was happening, and he ran over, yelling, "Espion, espion!" In about 2 seconds, I had a 9mm pistol about 5 feet from my face, and I could see the tension in his finger on the trigger. I thought to myself, think good thoughts, think good thoughts. And so my mind went to my month-old daughter, and I thought, that will be my last memory. We're trained as soldiers to be calm in the moment, and any time I was in danger, I was always calm in the moment. However, in 2017, I saw a movie on Darfur, where I served with the UN, and all of a sudden, I started to shake, and I got very, very angry. I was back there. And about 8 months later, I was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. And at one point, I was having to describe these various incidents, and as I recounted the memory, all of a sudden, I screamed, and I burst into tears. And the first thing I said was, I've waited 22 years to let out that scream.
The dangers that service members face on those missions, the potential violence that you can be exposed to, dealing with nations that are still at war or that resent you being there, it's just a place that you have to really be thinking all the time, and you can't let your guard down. There was an OSCE mission that was recognized with a specific medal. Was there any such recognition for the arms verification teams and the missions that they did?
Unfortunately not in my era. They did have a verification bar to the Special Service Medal that had been issued, but only for people who served in verification from 2008 onwards. So I feel it would be better if that was retroactive for those of us who served in those early years. Those missions that I participated in arms control verification don't necessarily make the history books, but yet some of the things we did, saw, and smelled are part of history.
So Ian, thank you so much for bringing in these wonderful artifacts. I know that this is a tip of the iceberg, and I was wondering if you had any plans on what you're going to be doing with this.
I want to help Canadians understand this period of history and what we did. Maybe some of these items could find a home with the Halifax Army Museum, or maybe some of these items could go to the National War Museum in Ottawa as well.
I don't believe the general public really understands what goes on any of these missions, and I don't believe that a lot of these things are recorded well, therefore they can't be taught well, so the stories aren't told.